All right, we got a little disturbance coming in here for Thursday night in through Friday, creating some rain and snow and perhaps even some freezing rain in places. So let's go on and take a look. And by Friday morning already, we're going to be having some areas of rain and perhaps even some spotty freezing rain and freezing drizzle. Some of these areas up across the northeastern parts of North Dakota, northwestern Minnesota. Even though it's not really showing anything, depicting anything on this particular model, we're getting moisture drawn up into this at the lower layers and then just kind of built up in through the mid layers and just kind of starting to slowly saturate it. And so even though you don't see anything in here at the early morning hours, this is around 6 a.m. or so Friday morning, there is the possibility of some freezing drizzle, perhaps even some freezing rain in through here to start off the day on Friday. Now, as we move this along, we do see some more areas of freezing rain show up, particularly around Grand Forks, over to Devil's Lake, down to Newtown, and even some of these areas now south of this could see some drizzle or freezing drizzle, just depending on what the temperature is at this point. This is around 9 a.m. on Friday morning. And then, of course, up here in the Arrowhead region, you're going to start to see some of that rain change over to snow. And continuing this on up to the noon hour on Friday, more of the same. We kind of see that dry line, that high pressure system really cutting off the precipitation further to the north and driving that a little further south. Of course, the snow gets a little bit wider up here across the northeast, and we continue to have freezing drizzle or freezing rain possible across east central parts of North Dakota. And again, some of these areas a little bit further to the south, even though there's nothing showing up there, that moisture continues to get pulled in there and it begins to saturate again from the lower levels on up. And so again, like I said, even though you don't see anything there, there's the possibility of some drizzle and perhaps some freezing drizzle. Just depends on what exactly the temperature will be around noontime. I think for the most part, most of these areas at this point will be more in the form of drizzle instead of the freezing stuff. Now, as we move this along to about 3 p.m., I think the surface, down at the surface, most areas are going to be warm enough such that it's either going to be rain or it's going to be snow because the upper levels will be cooling off. Not so much worried about the freezing rain or freezing drizzle at this point. So I think we're going to have kind of that transition, that quick turnover, more so from the rain as this moisture continues to get drawn north. And then we have the cold air coming in from the north, cooling things off and making it transition over to snow just a little bit further to the north by this point, right around 3 p.m. on Friday. Once we get into 6 p.m. on Friday, more of the same. Again, going to be more, it's either that rain or it's going to be that snow. And that's looking like more and more of the snow kind of setting up across southern parts of North Dakota and across central parts of Minnesota as well. Models were really having a hard time determining where this snow line ultimately is going to end up. They seem to be settling now, like I said, kind of across central parts of Minnesota, southern parts of North Dakota, particularly as we get into the evening hours on Friday. Now by 9 p.m., a little more snow, perhaps even moderate at times as we get down to the perhaps the Sauk Center, Alexandria area. Some of these areas across west central parts of Minnesota could see some light to moderate snow falling with this. The good thing, not much wind with this, but nevertheless probably creating some slippery conditions across this region as we get to about 9 p.m. on Friday. And then continuing on right up until midnight, Friday night, early Saturday morning, more of the same. That snow line doesn't really move a whole lot. Again, perhaps some light to moderate snow just on that borderline between the transition, just kind of where it briefly or quickly turns over. Probably going to be that best area for picking up maybe a little more of that moderate type of snow activity going into the overnight hours Friday night. And then continuing on 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, that snow line dropping just a little bit further south, creeping up to the Twin Cities metro area. It's going to be close. Some of you might see some flakes by 3 a.m. and then by 6 a.m. Very possible some of you across the Northwest Metro might be seeing a steady state of snowfall. Whether, say that 3 times fast, steady state of snowfall, but whether that'll accumulate, it's kind of hard to say. I think probably not a whole lot will accumulate particularly across the northwestern part of the metro. And then as this kind of continues on into the morning hours, Saturday morning by 9 a.m., The precipitation becomes a little more light in nature, becomes a little more thinned out. Some of that moisture really gets drawn away from the system. And then as we get closer to noon, you can see how things really begin to wrap up. And ultimately, by the time we get to Saturday afternoon, there's just not a whole lot left. Maybe a little bit of snow up in the Arrowhead region. And finally, by 6 p.m. Saturday evening, just some light flurries and some light snow showers left up here in the northeast. Now, the models are really having a hard time determining exactly how much snow is going to accumulate. I think they're having a hard time really determining how warm the surface will be and for how long it will be warm enough to just basically turn that snow into liquid before it just begins to accumulate, if that makes sense. Here we've got just a couple of different look at a few different models here, and you can see the big ranges that are between them all. Now, I think this one, it's the Canadian model and also the European model, seem to be fairly close in nature. And actually the NAM 3-kilometer model actually fairly similar as well. But I think ultimately what we're going to be looking at is just generally a 1 to 3 inch mark within this region in through here, basically across central and northeastern parts of Minnesota, and then perhaps extending into southeastern parts of North Dakota and northeast South Dakota as well. And it depends on how some of this reacts a little bit further to the south. Will some of this kind of accumulate down here in southwestern parts of Minnesota? You might be looking at 1 to 2 inches down there as well if enough snow does get going early enough down in that region. But ultimately, like I said, I think this will be the main area, 1 to 3 inches, perhaps some spotty 3 to 5 inches, maybe an isolated 5, particularly across central parts of Minnesota, might be possible. So just that's going to be the main area to keep your eye on as we go throughout the day Friday and into Friday night. Now beyond that, as we get through Saturday night and into Sunday, we do have this cold front that sweeps through from northwest to southeast, obviously going to be cooling off the high temperatures across the region, perhaps bring a few light snow showers across the far north, but nothing really too concerned about there. The only other thing it might bring could be the potential of some stiffer northwest winds, particularly across northern parts of Minnesota on Sunday. But as we start the week next week, ultimately we have this high pressure settling in, this cold high pressure. So we're going to start off next week on the colder side. But the good news is it won't last for too long. We do have this warm front that will be pushing eastward beginning Monday night really already and pushing into Tuesday. We could see those warm red lines beginning to move in. Kind of that ridge begins to set up across the region, as we can kind of see on these lines here. Basically just allowing some of that warmer air to push back into the region. So as we get into midweek, actually not looking too bad next week, not much going on weather-wise. And as we stretch this model out all the way to the morning of Christmas Eve, we can see not a whole lot going on, but we got to keep a little eye on the system down here that might eject out just in time for Christmas Day. In fact, the American model is much more aggressive with this. This is Christmas Eve already, and this one wants to develop a storm to run through our region Christmas Eve going into Christmas Day. Right now, that one is the outlier, but what it is showing us a little bit is just that the pattern will become just a little more active for our region. Whether that will impact us for actual Christmas Day or not, way too far out there to really say for sure, but we'll just have to keep an eye on and see what happens. Like I said, this one's a little bit of an outlier, but what the models are indicating roughly from a general standpoint is just the possibility of perhaps a little more of an active pattern running through our region by the time Christmas week rolls around. Well, might be possible a few more of you might have a white Christmas as this storm system comes through and lays down a little bit of snow on Friday and Saturday, particularly across central parts of Minnesota. Next week gets a little warmer. We'll see how much of that snow melts away. And then we'll just kind of keep an eye on the pattern and see what eventually develops for Christmas. Way too far out to say for certain, but just something to kind of keep an eye on for now. All right, everybody, for Region Weather Live, I'm meteorologist Brad Warner. Everybody, have a good day.